Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. I am Kimberly Bryant, the Director of Client Services here at Coleman Insights. And here with me are consultants Jay Nachlis and Meghan Campbell. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us on today's episode of Ask Me Anything, the webinar series where we answer your questions related to research, branding, and marketing strategy and audio entertainment. And today we're going to be doing something a little different and fun. In honor of Halloween, we are going to be sharing some scary research stories. I tried to make it funny.
I appreciate the effort.
It's not. I'm too bubbly for that, guys. Well, Jay and Meghan are going to share some of the scariest things that they've seen in research, and they're going to offer us some tricks and treats. But please feel free to use the chat feature and ask us any questions that you may have that pop up while they're sharing their stories, and we will do our best to answer those. All right, let's jump right in. Jay, why don't you start with your first scary story?
Sure. Should I introduce it with the bad rating story?
Get the mood going.
Yeah. I also have, by the way, for the occasion, something really scary. The worst candy on earth, candy corn.
I don't know, Jay. I love me some candy corn.
Oh, no.
Wow.
I'm very disappointed, Meghan. My wife put this in the house, trying to scare the living daylights out of me, I think. So, okay, so bad ratings. This is I remember as a program director, I can tell you that ratings day was the worst day on earth. They would usually come out around noon, and around 11:45, my stomach would be tied up in knots. It was awful. Like, really, I thought I was going to throw up. And then when they announced they were going to do weeklies, I was like, are you people trying to kill me? Yeah. Ratings day was always really, really scary. And, and sometimes, as you know, things can be out of your control and really, really scary. So, true story, there was a radio station we worked with that used to be almost always a top-rated radio station in their demo. Sometimes number one, almost always in the top three, big morning show, successful. And for some reason, they just tanked, and it got worse and worse every month. I can only imagine, the stomach, the poor constitution of this program director was awful. And so he actually started reacting to the ratings, which, he looked at it and says, well, Nielsen is showing that, we're bigger 45-54, so we should, make the music older. And I would say, never do that. Don't react like that to ratings, because you got to get under the hood and figure out what's going on. And which is what he did. And so we ended up doing a plan developer study for them. It was a big market strategic perceptual study. And what we ended up finding out from that was that, first of all, there probably was a meter issue, and this wasn't nearly as bad as it looked. And even though it wasn't going to be great in the short term, give it a little time, and this was probably going to fix itself, which it did. But the other thing that we were able to see was that listeners saw this station in a different way than the station was presenting itself. They saw it as a contemporary station. They were not really imaging as a contemporary station. Their music was a little too old. So we were able to strategically tell them, contemporize your music a little bit, use specific language to get credit for how listeners see you. And between those strategic adjustments and just a little bit of patience that we're able to show, through the plan developer, things got really, really good for that station. And the other part of that story was they really wanted to advertise. They were about to advertise the morning show. And we told them, I get why you'd want to do that. It's a big morning show. But right now, what needs to be understood is your base music position, the foundation, and getting across the fact that you're a contemporary radio station. And that's what needs to get across. They did that marketing campaign. It was successful, but the best rated day part was actually mornings. So it was like the tide lifts all boats. It didn't mean that the morning show did any worse. It was great for everybody. So it was a scary story with a happy ending.
Yeah. Well, those are important.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Megan, why don't you tell us a story? I know, you've had experience with some clients approaching you, like what we like to call focus group of one.
Yeah, this is more of a cautionary tale than
Yeah.
an example of a specific scary research story. Beware the focus group of one. Without research to lean back on, it's very often easy to get overly influenced by just one voice. That could be a super fan you've run into at an event. That could be the boss's wife who has a lot of passionate opinions about the radio station or the content, or just a loyal listener that's calling in often and giving you feedback or writing in with their thoughts. It's easy to have the last thing you heard be most present in your mind. But just keep in mind, these may or may not reflect the opinions of your entire listener base. And in the absence of formal research, really you need to widen your net as wide as you can when you're collecting this information. Don't allow one person to make those decisions, make changes. Like Jay just said, you shouldn't be reacting to ratings and what's going on in Nielsen. You shouldn't be reacting to the feedback from just one person. We do lots of different qualitative studies with as little as 10 long form one-on-one interviews with as many as 30 to 40 people in our Campfire online discussion groups. And in both of those studies, we get really great information. Of course, we'd love to lean back on a quantitative study that's done with a whole audience group or a wider market base. But you still can get great qualitative information with smaller segments, but it has to be more than one person. Shoot for talking to as many people as you can, super fans, casual listeners, random strangers you run into at the dry cleaner, whoever you can, to get a real, as good of an understanding as you can about how different people view your radio station or your brand.
Yeah, definitely a cautionary tale. That's for sure. All right, Jay, let's bring it back to you. What about you? What do you have? What tricks and treats do you have for us?
I want to talk about short-term versus long-term thinking here for a moment. So,
Yeah.
One of our good friends, Pierre Bouvard, who used to work for Coleman Insights and is now at Cumulus and Westwood One, talks a lot about this, talks a lot about short versus long-term thinking. When you think about it in terms of sales and kind of the retail world, think about Bed Bath & Beyond, which recently, as you know, went out of business, somehow has been strangely reconstituted by
back from the dead.
Right.
Yeah, back from the dead.
Yeah. But when you think of Bed Bath & Beyond, like to me, like Megan, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Bed Bath & Beyond?
That coupon I would get in the mail once a month.
The coupon. Everybody knows the 20% off coupon, right? Mm-hmm. If you're thinking about a 20% off coupon before what the store actually sells, maybe that's a problem. And so they became so dependent on their pricing and their discounting. And this is what happens in the retail world, which is like sale, everything must go. I've got to knock 30% off this weekend or nobody's going to come to my store, right? And I've got to do this remote and I've got to do this and this and this. And it's like, well, that comes at the expense oftentimes of brand building. And it's not to say you shouldn't do the tactical stuff or contesting. It's like, yeah, you should, but it's the balance that sometimes is like super out of whack. And so, so this short-term thinking trap is, a radio station that goes, okay, I'm going to focus my energy on these meter holders. I'm going to focus all my energy on these diary keepers. And they focus so much, it's like, it becomes a drug. It becomes a steroid. If I only give out another $1,000 a day, if I just give out, this trip, then everything's going to be okay. And when you fall into that trap, first of all, you set yourself up for needing to do it, because then you create this expectation. It's like, well, if they're not giving away $1,000, why should I listen? Because that's why I listen. That's a problem. JCPenney, remember when JCPenney ran into that years ago, where they tried this guy that used to run, I think the Apple stores, the guy that started the Apple stores, ended up working for JCPenney, and he tried to get rid of all their sales and did this whole thing where he said, every day is a great price. And all the people that shopped at JCPenney were like, well, we're gone because I shop at JC. It's all perception versus reality. Even if your prices are lower, they had a perception that the prices were higher because you're not doing a sale. So that's what happens. And so you need to balance this short versus long-term thinking. And it's funny how sometimes we get this, well, I don't invest in strategic research. It's like, but you've spent tens of thousands of dollars on contesting on your radio station. Sometimes it's really important to put the investment into the brand, building the brand, which that garners loyalty, that garners, strong perceptions. And then the great thing about it is then do a reasonable amount of tactical that supports the building of the brand, rather than putting it all into the tactical and short-term thinking.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was a lovely little treat. Thank you, Jay.
Oh, why, thank you.
All right, Meghan. I hear we have another scary story about an app.
An app and other things, really. Beware of making strategic decisions based on what you think you know about your audience. We've done a number of studies in recent years that brought to light some issues that clients just didn't know that they had. One that sticks out the most in my mind definitely has a little bit to do with an app. We did work with a company that has spent a lot of time and effort and energy creating this really fantastic app. And in their minds, they had shouted it to the rooftops, promoted it on air, and came into the study feeling that there should be a lot of awareness of the app and a lot of usage of the app. But when it came down to it, when we actually conducted the study, very few of their listeners were aware of the app. And because of that, very few used the app, and very few were aware, had limited knowledge of what their digital offerings were. And their digital offerings are awesome. So just be careful proceeding with something when, that company, if it had not done research, may have charged ahead with a different advertising campaign that year. They may have just been blinded, but instead they found out that they still had to continue promoting and marketing this app, and that their number one goal was to make sure that all of their radio listeners were aware of the digital product and then moving them onto their digital platform. So I think this really brings to light two things. Number one, research is key to understanding the issues facing your brand. Research can always uncover, or almost always uncover, things that you don't expect. Oftentimes we have a good understanding of or what we think we're dealing with, but oftentimes we see clients, hit with something that comes out of left field. And it's always great to conduct regular research to figure out what those things are. But also, number two, I can't stress enough the importance of consistent and frequent messaging. In this instance, this particular client had felt that they had, shouted this out, wide and loud, and that people were probably completely annoyed by it, and wanted to draw back on some of that because they figured, that was over. They didn't want to annoy anyone. But the truth is, consumers are hit with so much messaging from so many different platforms on a daily basis that it's really important that we do that consistently, frequently, and loudly, and in a way that catches their attention. If we need to convey something to our listeners, that we have a digital app, that we have more than what we have on the air on that platform, that we've changed formats, that something new is coming down the pipes, we have to say it loud, often, so that we can get people to actually not just hear it, but hear it and take action, because that takes a lot of work.
I think about that as a former program director. I think about that all the time because it is so difficult when you're working on the radio station level, because you use the station so differently than your listener. I was listening to the radio station 8-9 hours a day. Think about that when your listener might be listening 15 minutes. And so how easy is it for you to go, I'm tired of that song, so my listeners must be tired of that song. I've heard that message so often, so my listeners are I'm tired of that message. But it's so hard to step away, but you have to, because they don't listen anything like the way that you listen.
And not
Absolutely.
just like how frequently you listen, but also how you do it. So
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I listen to a client through their website, and I'm shocked by how long it takes the pre-roll to
Yes.
end before I even hear any music or the host that I'm looking forward to listening to, right? But if I were of course, in my car or at my home and I turn on my radio, I wouldn't have to experience that. So that's another thing I think that program directors need to keep in mind, is they're also not using your radio station in the same way, devices, platforms. So keeping all of that in mind is helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Jay and Meghan, for these cautionary tales, some scary stories that hopefully you all have learned a little bit from. Thank you for joining us today. That is all the time we have. And if you have any follow-up questions, I did post both Jay and Meghan's email address in the chat, but it's Nachlis at ColemanInsights.com and Meghan Campbell at ColemanInsights.com. Please feel free to reach out directly if you have any follow-up questions. If you aren't already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to our Tuesdays with Coleman blog on our website. And I hope you all have a wonderful Halloween. We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.